Hello and welcome. Slight technical delay stopped us from going live at 7. I hope you're all still here with us for a slightly different Premier Injuries podcast. There's obviously a big absence here. It's not just my beard, it's also Ben isn't here with us today. Welcome back. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. Just in reference to my beard, we're doing a lot of stuff around Movember. Raj will be talking about it. He's not done the Movember bit though. He'll just be talking around that issue. You'll get to see by subscribing how silly I look with whatever moustache I go for. And also every Thursday through the season we do these podcasts. This one is live today just for the sheer devilment of it. And like I said, Ben is not here today. But Raj, as always, a pleasure to talk to you as a fellow Gooner. How are you doing?
I'm good, man. Not too bad. Yeah, for my beard, my patients need stability in their life, so I can't make big changes to my look. It might throw them off.
That might cause, I don't know, some sort of injury to them, I guess.
We're all about holistic care.
Yeah. I mean, cause extra stress, and when you're working on them, that's not a good thing to do. But yeah, it's going to be quite exciting over the next month. As I said, you'll be talking about mental health issues, some of the other health issues to do with Movember, so keep in check with that. But let's get into talking about the Premier League. As always, we're talking about injuries and things to do with it as well, because I think the big starter has to be Antonio Conte. And the opener, again, as I said, a fellow Gooner. Are you a bit worried that he's now our biggest rivals?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because we know they approached him earlier prior. Well, they approached everyone prior to Nuno, so that's not really saying that much. But I don't know. I mean, it's interesting with Conte, just the demands he puts on his players, his style of play is quite interesting. I think his contract is set up for 18 months, so he gave himself an out if he's not being backed, right? I think it's a very smart play by him in that regard. And, it's interesting for him. We've talked about a lot. I mean, he demands a lot from the players, whereas they were kind of typically prior, they were set up to sit back and play on that counter, right? And so we'll see how they how they're able to become accustomed to those physical demands. Because like another example was when Arteta came to Arsenal, he talked about how the team just was not quite fit enough. And it's taken 18 months, 2 years for them to finally be able to play the way that he wants to play. And so that's always a transitional point in that regard. And you might see players, get shipped out who are unable to kind of meet those standards.
Yeah, this is the interesting one for me. I talked a bit about this with Ben yesterday. And of course, it's great to get your insights on it as well, because I think a lot of people in the Premier League are assuming with the psychological aspect of the new manager bounce that Tottenham are going to be good again, they're going to be brilliant. But first and foremost, they've had the opportunity to be good under two managers now, and they've not been able to do it. Granted, the style of football hasn't been great, but then you maybe have to ask the question, was the style of football turgid because they didn't have the personnel to maybe experiment with a more proactive, more pressing style of football? But the second thing is that point that you've said there, is it a realistic time frame maybe to not expect in the first few months for Conte to kind of impose his ideas? Because bring it back to Chelsea when he was there the first time, almost Arsenal when we played them was the point where Conte's luck changed. We beat them 3-0 at the Emirates, and then they suddenly started playing their style of football. But that took him about 2 months. And so, especially with the December schedule to get through, just coming up January as well, it's going to take a little bit of time. What are your thoughts on that one, Raj? Would you urge maybe a bit of caution in kind of thinking that it's going to be an immediate effect?
Yeah, I think you have to balance the psychological effect, like you said, for the players, knowing a coach like him is coming in with that natural transition to a new style. That being said, he does have players, like Emerson, who can play that wing back that he loves, right? Romero could play that. He's that center back that he likes, the type of center back. I think the biggest thing is going to be his relationship with Kane. Can he get Kane to believe in that project? Can he get Kane to really be that leader that he was, right? Because he's been off the pace compared to where he's at normally, right? We know he wanted to leave. And so the question becomes, does Conte coming in give Kane that confidence again of a manager who he knows is very high level, who he believes in, right? And so, I mean, look, for Kane or, for Son, for some of the team who's been there for a while, you went from Champions League contention under Pochettino, right, to where they are today. And so, and maybe it gives them that balance. Maybe it gives them that belief along with, Conte transition over to his style, which naturally is going to take some time. I think a big thing, I haven't looked at their schedule just yet, but it might come down to the difficulty of some of those games as well. It's hard to implement new systems when you're playing better teams, so you're going to be under that stress test. So all these variables, which makes it so fascinating. I mean, Conte, I think in general, is known to implement stuff relatively quickly. He can get teams to play in his style relatively quickly compared to other managers. And so, it's going to be fascinating to see that.
And I think it'll be interesting to see as well. Like you said, with the Kane situation, might take him a little bit of a while. Will he adapt at all? He's got the ability, but will he want to? I think a lot of people have kind of got the attention on Kane, but Son is the one that I think could profiteer a lot as well, because he's already in pretty good form. And so if the team can start working well around him, he's almost guaranteed to continue his fantastic brilliance. One final question then on Conte. Who do you think, as well as maybe Son, maybe Kane, is going to fit the system? Because we're looking at those wing backs. There's a hell of a lot of goal involvement from Conte's kind of wing backs at Inter Milan. They score a lot of goals, they assist a lot of goals. Matt Doherty comes to mind a little bit, but then, like you said, they brought in Emerson Royale, maybe because Doherty wasn't good enough. And then on that left side, Reguilon seems almost certainty, but Ryan Sessegnon is also in the wings as somebody who he's not back to full fitness. He is coming back from an injury, but he might also be there to come in. So do you imagine there could be a bit of upheaval there at the back as well over the transition period?
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to think so. I think in general, to answer your question, the wing backs will benefit the most. Emerson Royale has been a little, even Reguilon, they've both been a little allergic to playing consistent defensively. So that wing back position allows them to get forward a little bit more and kind of play into their strengths. And, when you're playing, there's some players whose defensive capacity or their defensive commitment comes from how involved they are on the offensive side of the pitch, right? So if they're contributing offensively, they might be more apt to contribute defensively as well. But I think in general, it's definitely, I'd have to say, Reguilon and Emerson to me, immediately come to mind.
And it'll be interesting as well because there's such a good fixture switch as well now. Everton this weekend, then after the international break, Leeds, Burnley, Brentford, maybe not so much, but then Norwich. There's a lot of opportunities there for the team to have, maybe in air quotes, easier games to ease into this new period. And just before we move on to the next discussion point, Mohammed Saeed has asked thoughts on captaining Vardy against Leeds. We're going to cover that towards the end of the show, so make sure to stay tuned, Mohammed. It's going to be a rare opportunity where we see into the mastermind play of Raj and his FPL insights. But we have to move attention to another side of London, the south side, and it just seems to be getting better and better for Crystal Palace. With injuries, the situation now is that Eze is looking like he's on a return, but is it a bit preemptive to expect him back in the next few game weeks? I mean, when do you realistically see him coming back into side? Because he's had some game time with the under-23s.
I within the timeline is post-international break for him, is my guess, just to let him ease in after being out now, for an extended layoff, came back pretty quickly. I think they're going to give him those balance games and then really give him some more time to get up to 100% fitness over the international break and then bring him back in after that. and then give him some consistent run time after that. I think with a player like him, you don't want to start him giving him game time and then you suddenly have a break, right? That just completely disrupts your fitness fluctuation, and we know those fluctuations can bring more risk. I think you want to get him in with some consistent minutes, and that will happen post international break.
And just kind of talking there, as you said, the risk of Eze, the type of injury that he's had, there's such a risk of re-injury, not just for the actual injury that he's had, but also other muscular problems related to it. In that kind of period straight after, I think it was an ACL, wasn't it, that he ruptured and injured. So there is the problem there in terms of the timeline. It kind of reduces every month after that. But then there is the fact that muscles linked to that kind of chain in the system are kind of under threat for a little while. So do you think that that's going to be something managed over the next few months as well? We'll see Eze in and around the team, like you said, getting those uninterrupted minutes, but he might be subbed off around 50, 60 minutes just to protect him.
Yeah, it was the Achilles, by the way, not the ACL for him. But yeah, same concept applies, that you can have compensation along the chain. That's something they're going to be working on a lot when it comes to his rehabilitation and return to play. But as you come back after being out for 5.5, 6 months, no amount of training can replicate in-game intensity. That's why they had him play in the U23s first. That's why you have something called balance games in the first place, right? You're going to see him likely be on that minutes limit and then reintegrate it slowly. And it's for that reason. You want to allow the body, the mind, the muscles, everything to acclimate gradually.
And with the Achilles as well, is there kind of specific muscle links to it that will be put under threat in those, recovery months after he kind of gets back into the first team?
Yeah, I mean, the big one you're looking at is the calf muscles, because we know those atrophy significantly after an Achilles rupture, and they're under constant demand while playing football. So that's immediately where I am looking, because they also do this similar functions to the Achilles tendon. I mean, they literally connect to the Achilles tendon. So that's where I'd be looking. But I'm sure, like I said, I'm sure they've been doing these assessments as well. That's part of their entire return to play process, is to assess all these variables. But it's, people always think when someone gets injured, it's, they're quote rushed back. It's an inexact science. There's a gray area there. You're playing probabilities. That doesn't mean you always win, doesn't mean you always lose.
And one final question in terms of Eze's injury then. We talked about maybe the physical aspects of it, but there is the mental side as well, the kind of risk of his worry is a kind of phobia that he could have re-injury. And Aaron Ramsey talked about it. It took him quite a few years for him to even get back to those levels because of that. As part of maybe the modern process of bringing back a player, is that factored in at all? The psychological aspects of it?
I think it is more and more. I can't speak to Eze himself. I'm not quite familiar with Crystal Palace's return to play. Like, for example, I know Liverpool has their own sports psychologist that they likely use to help with some of those things. A lot of teams do. I'm pretty sure Crystal Palace likely does. I can't think of it off the top of my head. But yeah, in general, we're seeing more and more consideration for the mental factors, for that fear of, re-injury or fear of movement, which is called kinesiophobia. So, and that comes into play naturally, right? You have this injury that kind of happened during training. So it might be in the back of your mind, what if it happens again? Can I really push off and explode for this ball? Should I go in this 50-50 ball? And so that has to be part of that return to play process.
Keeping it on the London lifestyle, we're starting off with kind of all the London clubs. Kieran Tierney, this is an interesting one. It was a bone bruise. What are the potential kind of complications with that, and why is he being managed so tentatively for his comeback?
Yeah, with bone bruising, there's no real complication. It's just a matter of pain and discomfort. And the reason he's being handled so conservatively, and I have a video of this on my YouTube, is that with the foot and ankle, it's just there's so many different types of force through it in multiple planes, especially in football, where obviously it requires a lot of foot strength, a lot of foot mobility, where it doesn't make sense to try and rush the player back. There can be a lot of pain and discomfort in that ankle. And so if you try to rush back through it, it can lead to those knock-on downstream effects. And then also this season, a reason they went out and got someone like Nuno Tavares is to not to have to rush Tierney back, right? And risk further issues down the line.
And we've kind of seen this maybe a little bit this season as well. Tierney's looked a bit jaded, not to his usual standards, and this timeout might serve him well too. One final thing maybe with the Tierney situation is the club will probably have one eye on the fact that it is the international breakup next. And so if they manage it and kind of make the Scotland team realise that Tierney is injured, he will get a few extra days that he wouldn't have to be able to come back. Naby Keita, we're going to go into, maybe we should call this, a special on these types of injuries, but we've got Keita, Varane and Roberto Firmino all experiencing hamstring injuries that they've all kind of come back with re-injuries as well. And we've talked about Eze at the start there. We talked about Tierney's potential complications and re-injuries. And we've almost seen this in action. One thing that maybe we should start off with, as you've kind of already highlighted a bit, Raj, but people often kind of go in and get angry and they go, well, Keita's come back, Varane's come back, Firmino's come back. They must have been risked. But it's not always that. It's sometimes just the reality and unluckiness of the situation, isn't it, Raj?
Yeah, anytime you're off and you're not playing in matches, it's going to dent your fitness. So when you come back, you're at risk. It's just what it is. That's why you see players who even, they miss one game and they come back and they injure a different muscle, like Varane, right? He came back, he didn't re-injure the same region. He injured a different muscle. And so people saying he was rushed back, maybe not. But the guy I would say was probably rushed back was Maguire. He only had one session on grass before he came back versus Leicester. Varane had multiple. He actually went through the process. It seemed like he was able to handle it. I think the only concern with Varane is we know as games get more intense, you're at more risk for injury. He got hurt in a Champions League game, which we know tend to be higher intensity in general. So that may help explain that. With Keita, he missed, a week or so after that injury. And we know he has a history of muscular injuries as well. With Firmino, possible re-injury. Once you have one hamstring injury, you're at risk, significant risk for re-injury. A high-level research shows I think 30% of footballers get re-injured within the first 2 weeks of returning after a hamstring injury. And that's a significant amount. And so again, none of these ever typically surprise me. When I see a player come back and they pick up a muscular injury, it's part of that risk reward process. I had to use the term. It's been too long since I used it.
Yeah, it's part and parcel of this podcast now. If risk and reward is not mentioned, we know that something's gone up. It's almost like a message to say you're not feeling too well.
Exactly.
With the situation with Roberto Firmino and just with hamstring injuries in general, why is there such a propensity, as you said, there 30% within a few weeks of this happening again? It maybe in comparison to other injuries where it doesn't happen as often.
Yeah, it's really just about how much demand the hamstrings come under during football. They're under a significant load, whether you're running, during acceleration, during kicking. So you combine all three of those things, that's a heavy, heavy load. And then you cannot replicate those outside of the game. No matter what anyone wants to say, you're not going to have the same type of burst, same type of intensity on a kick in a practice or 11-on-11 scrimmage that you will in a game. So you're putting even extra demand on there. And then, of course, fatigue becomes a factor in game because that intensity level goes up. So now the body's becoming more fatigued in general, which can then lead to some of these muscular injuries. And so it's a heavily in demand muscle, that the calves, the adductors, and the hip flexors. That's why you often hear so much about these injuries.
And with the situation as well, we look at somebody like Mikel Antonio. Is it that with each hamstring injury, there's muscle tissue that kind of never heals, or is it kind of scar tissue that then affects the ability of the player? Because it's almost, one of the certainties in life, tax, death, and Antonio to have a hamstring injury at some point in the season. Is it related to the fact that he just keeps having it, and it aggravates it?
Yeah, I mean, part of it's going to be scar tissue with him, which is very, very difficult because it decreases the capacity for that muscle to handle that level of stress. Also, when you have pacier, faster players, that puts more stress on the hamstrings. And then thirdly, there is some research showing that players of, I think, African Aboriginal descent tend to have more muscular issues and more muscle strains. I mean, the guy who comes to mind for me, like the poster boy, is Ousmane Dembele. I know he's had very similar player in terms of high pace, right? Similar background, and just constant hamstring injuries that he can't get out of.
So let's continue into the discussion points. And as we said at the start to Mohamed, just before actually we go into it, do put any more questions that you have on injuries or whatever you want to know from Raj here. But we're going to talk about captains really quickly here. We've got you for a few more minutes, Raj. This weekend, I think it's one of the most exciting weekends of Premier League football in terms of the fact that nothing is actually clear. Man United play City, Brentford play Norwich. Then you've got Chelsea against Burnley, but there's no Romelu Lukaku, so you don't know 100% who's going to start, who's going to be the striker. You've got Brighton that play a Newcastle team, and Brighton have been in pretty good form. The big one for us is obviously Aubameyang versus Watford, but then Son, new manager bounce against Everton, and Leeds against Leicester opens up the opportunity for Jamie Vardy. And then, of course, Mo Salah. I mean, there's almost an opportunity to captain or look at a player from each of those fixtures as having such a high ability to score points. So kind of from your perspective, which is the one, or maybe there's a couple that kind of stand out to you as the most exciting picks?
Yeah, the guy who stood out to me, it's funny that Mohamed mentioned this. We had talked about Jason and I previously. For whatever reason, my gut said Vardy versus Leeds. Part of that is Leeds' defensive record. But secondly, Vardy coming off a loss where he didn't score versus Arsenal, which I'm sure irritates him because he always scores versus Arsenal. And so I think he's going to be extra motivated in that regard, and to play a team like Leeds, who you can kind of get into and, really put up some points against. So that was the guy that stood out to me. Potentially, I think also talked about was a Foden versus United, who of course have had their defensive issues, especially without Varane. Although now that they switched to the 5 at the back, might be a little more difficult, but who's to say? But yeah, if I had to choose one, it's Vardy.
I like Vardy as well. He's in my team, and I think he's got a great opportunity, as you said, they're against a Leeds team. And the problem is, we've talked about it in previous podcasts, is the Leeds team, their defenders return to play, return to sharpness. And there's been a lot of players in and out of that squad. So it gives the opportunity for Jamie Vardy. Yes, he was partially injured. He came off for 45 minutes in one of the games. But realistically, this season, he's probably been the fittest he has been for a long while. He's in the best form he's had for a long while as well. Kind of going into the end of last season, he was carrying an injury. And now he's back to his best. And, we do have to talk about Mohamed Salah because he's in the form of his life. He's arguably the best player on the planet at the moment. And he's playing a West Ham side that have only kept 2 clean sheets this season. They're conceding lots at the back, but they're scoring lots going forward. And so there probably will be an opportunity for Salah to score a goal. But the question is it kind of almost a limit on just one? Because as bad as West Ham have been defensively. They've not, had a shellacking from a team yet. They've not been wiped, all over the floor. Whereas Leicester can do that against Leeds. There's like that high ceiling there. And Man City on their day can score 5 or 6 against anybody and everybody. So that I'm agreeing with you in this one. Kind of Foden and Vardy are the kind of picks for me. The problem is expected ownership in terms of Fantasy Premier League. Yep. Mo Salah is going to be captained by everybody and their mother. And so he's going to enter this game week with 160, 170, maybe even bordering on 200% kind of expected ownership. And so if he does do a job, which he can do, he's going to send you down the ranks. Last question then, Raj, is do you play for yourself, for your enjoyment, or do you play to win and kind of factor in the fact that Salah might punish you? So do you play negatively with that in mind and just captain him because everybody else is? Or do you think, I'm going to break the mold this week?
I mean, I think in this case, you have to look at who's most likely to run rampant and who's not owned as much, right? I think in this case, with the matchups, that's why I would go, I feel like, just based on all those contextual factors, I think I would go and pick Vardy versus Leeds. I think he's more likely to run rampant, and you have the double bonus that he's just not, he won't be, the expected ownership won't be nearly as high as it is for Salah. That's not saying Salah can't go, he's in the form, he's arguably the best player in the world right now, so he can certainly do it. But, for me, if odds are to me that the matchup favors Vardy in terms of just on the pitch and also in terms of the ability to potentially just, catapult you up the ranks. Let's say if Salah only has a mediocre game and Vardy has a great game.
Yeah, and kind of looking at it as well, just to correct myself, I said West Ham had only 2 clean sheets. They've actually had 3 this season, but West Ham are averaging about a goal conceded every game, whereas Leeds are nearing more that 2 expected goals conceded per game, and they're matching that as well. Their expected goals of 16, which is in the bottom 4, and they've actually conceded 17, so that they're kind of underperforming there, whereas West Ham, for their faults, have matched about that 11 goals conceded in terms of it. They've got 11 goals actually conceded as well. But that is the end of this week's very special, different Premier podcast. As we said, Ben is not around to be with us on today, but that doesn't mean that you are going to miss him, because he will be back through the weekend as well. So make sure to subscribe. He's got some content actually that he's done a little bit earlier today that will be going out a little bit later. But also make sure to head over to 3cB Performance. Fantastic analysis there. In terms of injuries, you got some great tactical insights as well, Raj. You did one on Ronaldo the other day. I don't know if you want to explain to people maybe about that video, but also the fact that you've got a Patreon as well.
Yeah, so the video itself was just looking at Cristiano's volley technique on that great goal he had versus Atalanta, with Ole Gunnar Solskjaer breathing a sigh of relief on the sidelines there. And so, but I mean, go check that out. If you ever want to support, what I do or that type of content and get bonus content, check out, the Patreon. It's the same 3CB Performance. And so I appreciate any support. I appreciate any views that you guys give. But more so than that, ask questions, bring comments. That's what it's really about, I think, for Jason and I, even at Premier Injuries. It's that community engagement. That's, the banter. That's the most fun about it, right?
Exactly. This is why we do these live shows as well, so that people can kind of get involved, send in their questions, have a bit of a laugh, be a bit silly, but also kind of give important insights. That's why I love this podcast as well with you and Ben, because it goes a little bit deeper than the usual kind of analysis on this sort of stuff that other channels may have. That they'll say somebody's injured, but why, how long will it be, kind of cutting through rumour or misinformation. So again, that is why you should subscribe to the channel. Make sure to like the video, share it with friends, and comment below, because you might have missed asking a question today, but we do answer them through the week as well. But for now,